Today we're going to be talking about the VK7501K, the Tier 8 Premium Heavy tank that was recently introduced to the supertest. So this is a German vehicle, as you probably guessed from its name, and it's very interesting for a few reasons, but I will have to say here just at the very start, the characteristics are subject to change, so what we see here is probably not going to be the final thing that we actually get in the game. But I just want to quickly just say that this is credited to the Armored Patrol. This is where I actually saw the article, and it came from, I believe, the World of Tanks forums. So yeah, credit to them for posting this here up, because it's something that's interesting to talk about. Now, I've always kind of liked my just German heavy tanks, which are good at side scraping, and this one here seems pretty much perfect for me for the most part. But let's quickly look at the stats here just a bit more in depth. So just taking a look here at the initial stats, you can see it has 180mm of frontal armor, 100 side armor, and 80 rear armor. So the 100 side armor is really solid for a rear-mounted turreted vehicle, and the 180mm of frontal armor, a lot of people are probably going to see that and immediately think, oh, well, that's a bit much, don't you think? However, I would say that actually is a pretty reasonable amount, considering the armor on the front is probably angled, I would say probably about 30 degrees, and the lower front plate seems angled at about 20 degrees. It's not really that well angled. So even though the armor is going to be thick, I don't think it's going to be the most effective armor in the game. Like, I think it's probably going to be sitting around 230, 240 effective armor, but I don't expect it to be much more than that, just given that the angling doesn't seem to be the greatest, but the actual armor thickness is good enough to make up for that to an extent. And we'll get back to this in a minute. There's actually a point I want to make about that. But armor seems pretty good. And if I had to guess like the way the armor is going to be laid out in this vehicle, if I had to give you like a rough idea of what I expect the armor model on this thing to actually be like, I would expect there to be 250mm of armor on the center of the turret, just here, and it would gradually decrease to probably around about 200 around here and around here. It would probably just gradually decrease just to make it like not insanely good frontal turret armor. I would expect this sort of deck area here to be 40mm or 30mm. I would expect the roof on the vehicle to be probably 40mm. I would expect the cupola to be between 100 and 150mm of armor. The entire side armor on the turret to be 100mm. The entirety of the side armor on the tank to be 100mm. But Wargaming could do something where they make the lower side armor like 80mm. But I really hope they do not do that, because that has a pretty significant impact on how effective the actual armor on the vehicle is. So I would hope it's 100mm all over the side armor, so it's kind of like the Lova in that regard. The upper front plate I would say is going to be 180mm, and the lower front plate I would guess is probably going to be between 140 and 160mm of armor. I wouldn't expect much more than that, because I think they're getting a bit more interested in having weak points on vehicles. Like, this thing I don't think is going to be Chrysler K levels of armor strength. Like, this thing's going to be pretty damn well armored, but it's going to have weak points, unlike things like the Chrysler K, because it is a German vehicle, and German vehicles always have weak points in some shape or form. The Americans and the Russians are the only ones that don't. So yeah, I think overall this thing here's armor is probably going to be pretty damn solid. And I would say that those armor values that I gave you there are probably going to be the rough region that you're going to be expecting. There's going to be some overmatch zones, there's going to be some weak points you can exploit, and I think that's going to be good for the general like gameplay at tier 8. Now, this thing will also have the general weak point that's just kind of consistent on all these sort of German style vehicles. You see how the hull actually kind of goes over the top of the tracks here? Like, the track is here and the hull actually extends over the top of it. So if this thing's coming up over the top of a ridge and you fire up into the drive wheel, you'll actually be able to penetrate and do damage and keep the tank tracked while not being vulnerable to being shot at. So it's something you can do against Tiger 2s, Jagdtigers, just all those sorts of vehicles which have the side armor that goes over the top of the tracks. It's mainly something that's prevalent on the German vehicles, but yeah, that's just a general thing with the design of these tanks. So that could be potentially like a weak point you have to deal with at some point. So you can also see this thing has a 900 horsepower engine and a 12 horsepower per ton ratio. So a quick wee bit of maths, and you can see this thing here is about 75 tons from memory, because I worked this out before. Yep, 75 tons. And you might be wondering, well, why'd you work that out? The name is VK7501K. Of course it was 75 tons. Well, this thing here is called the VK7201K. and it was 120 tons because reasons and logic. So yeah, that was the reason why I just double checked the weight on this thing to make sure it actually made sense. Because for all I knew, this thing here could be 90 tons somehow and still be called the 75, because you know, logic. So let's see. Next thing here to talk about here is the actual reload on the gun. You can see it's 16.5 seconds, and I haven't mentioned this up until this point, but the alpha damage on a tier 8 premium vehicle that's a heavy tank is 490. That's pretty meaty alpha damage for a tier 8 premium heavy tank. That's, I think, the highest alpha damage of any tier 8 premium heavy tank in the game. In fact, it actually might be the highest alpha damage of any tier 8 heavy tank in the game, excluding things like the 15cm on the OHO. So this thing is going to hit like a truck. This thing is going to be something to be aware of even in tier 10 games, because you can see there are the 263 penetration on the premium rounds. That effectively makes this thing sort of comparable to the Panzer 7. It's going to have lower alpha damage than the Panzer 7 because the Panzer 7 has 560 alpha damage, but the penetration with the premium rounds brings up the sort of penetration level of the standard rounds of the Panzer 7. So this thing is going to be something to contend with no matter what matchmaking it's in, pretty much when it comes to its firepower. Now, you can also see that the accuracy and the aiming time are not the greatest on this vehicle. The aiming times can to be expected, because typically just German vehicles in general have relatively long aiming times in comparison to their counterparts. I mean, this thing here has a 2.7 second aiming time base, or 2.9 seconds. I'll actually quickly just double check the base stats to make sure that's right. Yeah, 2.7 seconds for this. And let's see, this thing here has 2.9 seconds. I always forget the Lova has a really bad it's stock aiming time. Now, I've just remembered about this here. Now, the reason why I was mentioning this thing here earlier on is because the precedent for the overmatch zone is pretty much right here. So I mentioned the overmatch zone when I was pointing at the top of this thing's turret, talking about the armor. Well, this thing appears to have a very similar turret to the VKB, at least the VKB stock turret. So I think it's pretty reasonable to assume this thing will probably have a 40mm overmatch zone on the top of the turret, so you'll never really want to have enemy vehicles getting above you, because if an enemy vehicle gets above you, then they're probably going to just fire straight down on top of this area and penetrate it every single time. And my guess for the roof armor is pretty much because I don't expect them to give it too strong, like whole deck armor, because I expect they want it to be somewhat vulnerable to artillery, because it is like a generally just kind of like a German super heavy tank. So back onto the topic of the gun, you can see that the reload is 16.5 seconds. So to work out the just general like rounds per minute of this vehicle, we'll just do 60 divided by 16.5 to get how many rounds per minute this thing's actually going to be able to fire off. And it works out about 3.6. So let's work out DPM by multiplying that by 490, and you get about 1800, just under 1800 DPM. So looking at it there, it actually looks like the DPM might be a little bit higher than the Marbreakers, and it's going to be a lot higher than the Lovas. So this is assuming these are the base stats for this vehicle, which I think is safe to assume, because I don't see why they would include like equipment and stuff like that in these base statistics. So this thing's going to be the least accurate out of all these vehicles. At least that's my assumption. Oh well, I guess it's a wee bit more accurate than the Marbreaker. I always forget how bad the accuracy is on this thing. Jesus. But it's going to be middle of the road when it comes to accuracy and actually have the highest DPM, which is interesting. But it does pay for that in the fact that it has 5 degrees of gun depression, which is easily the worst between these three vehicles. I mean, the Marbreaker gets 8 degrees, the Lova gets 10. So, yeah, it does have its advantages when it comes to DPM and alpha damage, which is an interesting combination, because typically if you have high DPM you don't have particularly high alpha damage, but in this thing here you can have this kind of sort of like a merger between the two. But 5 degrees of gun depression, that's going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to have trouble with. Now, I've experienced playing the VKB, so I have a feeling I would probably be able to play this thing relatively well, I would say, but it really comes down to how exactly Wargaming decides to balance the armor on this thing, because if they balance it the way I said I would balance it, then this thing could probably be a pretty formidable tier 8 heavy tank. but if they go too far in one direction when it comes to giving it weak points, then this thing could be another Marbreaker, which I think would be really unfortunate, because the Marbreaker was a massive disappointment, and I really hope this thing isn't a massive disappointment as well. So the final things just to say about this thing, just before I finish off, are just the mobility stats. So we already know that the horsepower per ton ratio is sitting at 12, which is nearly 1 higher than the Lova, but it only has half the gun depression, and I would actually argue that the turret in the Lova is almost certainly going to still be stronger than this thing's turret. So the Lova definitely still has advantages over this thing, as well as accuracy as well. But this thing here, as part of weight ratio, is about 1 higher than the Lova's. The top speed's 5 kilometers an hour slower, but the actual turret traverse speed and the tank traverse speed seem pretty solid. 24 and 26, I think that was. Yeah, 24 and 26. And just for comparison's sake, the tank traverse on the Lova is 24, and the turret traverse is 22. That's interesting. Or no, sorry, the turret traverse is 23. I always forget they have 2 separate digits for that for some reason. So it's going to be a little bit more maneuverable than the Lova, and that's an interesting thing to be aware of. Like, it has the weakness when it comes to gun depression. It's probably going to have more overall weaknesses when it comes to its armor, but it's going to have a faster aiming time than the Lova. It's going to have a higher alpha damage than the Lova by 170. It's only going to have 8 less penetration than the Lova, which was actually kind of surprising. Like, this thing pretty much has the alpha damage of an E75 with the penetration of a Tiger II, which is a pretty solid combination. And it only has 50 less health than the Lova as well. So I have a feeling this thing will probably get nerfed in some ways before it comes to the live server, or they'll give it a bunch of weak points that are just not necessary. So yeah, like in its current form, I think this thing would be a little bit better than the Lova, like probably like 5-10% better than the Lova in most scenarios. But the Lova, when it comes to just being like a hold down monster, will definitely still be better because of the gun depression, the extra flexibility that gun depression gives you, as well as the Lova's just lack of weak points on the turret, because the turret weak point on top you pretty much can never really hit these days. And the Lova as well has a substantially more consistent gun than this thing. So I think this thing could be definitely a very interesting vehicle. I feel like this thing's going to struggle more in tier 10 games than the Lova would, but I feel like it could probably have more of an impact in tier 8s and tier 9 games than the Lova could. So yeah, it'll be definitely interesting to see how this thing plays out, and I'm really actually looking forward to playing this thing and seeing for myself what it's actually like. So let me know what you guys think of this here in the comment section below, because I would play this thing in its current form. If my guesses for the armor turn out to be right, I would play this thing, no problem whatsoever. I would actually get this thing pretty much immediately, because it seems pretty much perfect for my playstyle, and I would probably rebuy the Panzer 7 just so I could train a crew for the Panzer 7 in this thing. Let me know what you guys think of this video in the comment section below. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.